Good morning and welcome to our webinar. And our webinar today is on the changing of face of sales and what has changed in sales over time. And so we'll go over that with you. Just a way of introduction, my name is Colin Parker. I'm the Chief Sales Officer for Lone Star Sales Performance. And we work with small business owners and their sales teams to help them generate and capture more leads, identify those leads that are ready to buy, and convert those opportunities into sales. Now, I've been involved in sales my whole business career and have been watching as sales has changed over the last 25 years. Now, there seems to be two camps of experts on the business landscape out there. And so the first one is Camp Anti-Sales, which says we're witnessing the decline of the salesperson. The salesperson is less important. The internet, social media, and access to information will eventually get rid of all those annoying salespeople. Now, this group's led by people who have a vested interest in you using social media and ultimately their services. Now, the other camp, we'll call that Camp Status Quo. And they say nothing has changed and you should continue to be doing business as you used to. And, well, guess what? This camp is filled with people who also have a vested interest in you not using it, with you not using the new methods, but using those tried and true methods. But the reality is sales has changed. And like anything, there's a sales reality. And the reality is selling has changed and it's never going to be the same again. But the notion that selling is dead is equally as misguided. Now, I like to think I have a unique view of the marketplace because when I started in sales, it was before the age of the internet. I was involved in management meetings where we talked about if the internet was a fad. I was working in the technology industry and I watched as new technology could spring up and absolutely decimate those old technologies. And I watched whole industries come and go. Remember Blockbuster? Started in 1985. At its peak in 2004, Blockbuster had 60,000 employees and more than 9,000 stores. Now only 6 years later in 2010, filed for bankruptcy and now only have 50 stores that remain, all owned by franchisees who really refuse to quit. They're hanging on for dear life business-wise. Now, in this webinar, I've pulled together some research to show you how sales is changing and evolving. And I'm going to recommend some strategies to prepare you to position your company, your sales team, yourself, your products and your services to sell more in a changing sales environment. So the first thing I want to talk about is the balance of power. Now, the balance of power in sales has shifted. Buyers once had to rely on salespeople to provide them with information, which meant setting up a bunch of meetings with a variety of providers. You then had to sit through the dog and pony show as each salesperson showed you why their product was the one you wanted to purchase. Now, if you wanted something, the salesperson usually extracted a price for the request. Now, that's because the salesperson controlled the flow of information and also the sales agenda. So think about it. You want to see a product demo? The salesperson would probably ask you that all the decision makers be in the room and be committed to watching a demo. That was the price you paid to actually get the demo. And some might even ask you for a commitment to buy the product if it met your organization's wants and needs. If you wanted to know cost, guess who you had to talk to? The salesperson. Want to talk to people who had used the product or service? Guess who provided you with that list? All roads led back to the sales organization. the sales organization always extracted a price from you to get the information that you wanted to see. But now the pendulum has swung in the other direction. The internet has enabled the buyer to be able to find out what products are available, who can provide them, what it will cost. We can find user reviews, maybe even get a demo of the software with just a few keystrokes. Now, the internet has made information readily available to everyone. Of course, that's good information, bad information, valuable information, and questionable information, all available 24 hours a day. So what has this glut of information done? Well, it's shown well in a recent report done by Google and an organization called CEB, where they surveyed more than 1,500 customer contacts. These are decision makers and influencers involved in a recent major business purchase. And for 22 B2B organizations, the finding from this survey that should get your attention is the average customer has completed more than 1/2 of the purchase decision-making process, that's 57%, prior to engaging a supplier sales rep directly. Now, this number ran as low as 50% and as high as 70% at the high end. So depending on the industry. So if you think about that, over 50% of the sales process is gone. So they're no longer reaching out to you early when they're starting that research phase. It's coming much, much later. So here's a number of implications that you need to get from this piece of data. One, as a seller, you've lost over 50% of your sales process. It's gone. If you fail to show up strong with your web presence, you're never going to get a call from that prospect. You'll be eliminated early. And that's what's happening is the idea is not inclusive, it's exclusive. I'm going to eliminate people from the sales process by taking a look at their website. Then I'm going to interact with those people who I think can help me with my problem. The other thing that you should take from this data is your idea of what you or your salesperson should be doing on first contact with a prospect probably needs to change. And I'm going to go into each one of these points a little more detail as we move along. But ultimately, we've always known that they were doing more research before they were contacting us. I don't think many people realized how far along and how much closer these people were to purchasing because they've actually gone through this due diligence phase. And by the time they're actually having that first interaction, they're in serious mode. They're looking to purchase. So let's talk about too much information. So the glut of available information causes a problem for both you and the buyer. Remember that all the information on the internet includes great information, bad information, wrong information, and slanted information. The information is developed with a perception, the seller's perception. Now what happens on the other end is the reader digests that information and comes up with their own perceptions based on their worldview and the collective information that they've digested. So your prospects are now coming to you with preconceived perceptions of your industry, your company, and your products. So the old idea of you or your salespeople delivering information and talking about your products or services is no longer true. In fact, the first order of business must be to determine the buyer's perceptions. The buyer's perceptions, correct, incorrect, or even misguided, strongly influence whether they buy from you or your competitors. Let me go back over that. So the idea of you or your salesperson delivering information and talking about your products or services is no longer true. The first order of business must be to determine those buyer perceptions, because the buyer's perceptions, whether they're correct, incorrect, or even misguided, will strongly influence whether they buy from you. The other issue that goes on is too much information can often cause the buyer to slow down making a decision. So let me give you an example of what happened just to me recently. I was going to San Francisco on a business trip, and I had to book a hotel. I went to TripAdvisor and started looking at hotels. 2 hours later, I'd read significant reviews, knew a lot more about San Francisco hotels, but I was no closer to having booked a hotel. So too much choice, all seeming the same, causes the buyer to significantly slow or delay making a purchase. So what you're having is, yeah, lots of the sales process is gone, but the buyer is still dealing with having too much information, not being able to process all that information. Another piece of thing is about that we got out of the research done by Google and CEP that is critical for you to consider, is one of my favorites, which is 65% of buyers will ultimately buy from the first organization that can add valuable information to the buying process. Again, that's 65% of buyers will ultimately buy from the first organization that can add valuable information to their buying process. Now that's very, very important. Think of what I'm saying here, is if you add value here, you're going to win the deal over here. You could win 2/3 of the deals that you're in if you're the first one to add value early on. If you're the one who can help them early on and they see value in what you provide, they're more likely to buy from you. So I've got some important questions you should be asking yourself at this point. So the first one is, does my website add value to the buying process, or is my content self-centered and product and service focused? So when you look at your website, is it all about you? Is it about your products and your services? Not about the person visiting, about their problems, their issues. Because nobody's coming to your website saying, I want to hire a bookkeeper. What they're looking for is answers they have about accounting, or maybe the answer to the problem that they have that maybe a business consultant can give to them. So that website has to add value to the buying process, not be a brochure about what you do. Does your sales process address adding value when you meet with a prospect, or do you just talk about what you offer? Would you consider your sales team and yourself to be subject matter experts, or are they product and service describers? And unfortunately, that's what we see with most salespeople today. and most small business owners is they go in and describe their products. What you need is to be a subject matter expert. That's what the buyer is looking for. And last, what do my prospects consider valuable information that would aid them in the buying process? Now, the key is, what do my prospects consider valuable? Not what you consider valuable, but what they consider valuable. So let's talk about another thing that we're seeing happening, and it's self-diagnosis. And in this day and age of a flat sales landscape, coupled with ample opportunity to Google anything, the temptation for people to reach their own conclusions about their problems is strong. And we see it time and time again in sales situations where people say, this is my problem. Now, if you're, as a salesperson, if you're just taking that, if you're just taking what the customer says, you're going to run into problems. You see, prospect self-diagnosis can be costly and even dangerous. So here are a few truths you need to consider and how self-diagnosis affects sales. When a prospect self-diagnoses, they're essentially assuming that they know the subtleties that the diagnose constitutes. Now, this is very dangerous. As a person who assumes that they can surmise what is going on with their business may miss the nuances of that diagnosis. For example, I spoke with a company president who determined that his salespeople couldn't close business. He was bound and determined to get someone to teach his salespeople how to get more aggressive when it came to closing business. And so he went out and wanted to find a hard closer who could teach what he deemed his salespeople were missing. So he hired an internal sales trainer who fit the bill. The problem was that his diagnosis was completely wrong. The new sales styles that he installed and had his trainer teach these people not only devastated new products, but current customers and even his sales team started leaving, preferring not to be sold to in that manner, and the salespeople didn't want to sell in that manner with high pressure. Sales went down, not up as anticipated, and unfortunately the owner's self-diagnosis was all wrong. The problem was in the leads that they were generating and the prospects they were targeting. Once they adjusted how they approached the marketplace, the closing rate went up dramatically. If you're talking to the right people at the right time, the close rate would go up. His problem was his salespeople weren't bad closers. The fact is they were fairly good. The problem was they weren't talking to the right people. And why their pipeline stretched forever was because they were talking to people who would never buy from them. And so they had a problem in the qualifying and targeting area, not in the closing area. But that self-diagnosis, that was very, very expensive. So here's some important questions to be asking yourself about self-diagnosis. Do you aid the customer in diagnosing the root of the problems, or do you hide it away as part of your proprietary process? Now, I know a number of people who do this, which is they say, well, I don't do that until I go in. But if you don't help them to diagnose their problems, they might decide that you're not the answer to their problems. And so you've got to provide some help along the way to help them diagnose correctly. Give them some things that they might not already be thinking of. Do you offer tools on your website to help prospects in that diagnosis stage? In the sales situation, do you push back and question prospects' assumptions? Or do you assume that they understand their own business? And this is important. This is a big change, is that you've got to go in early and you've got to be asking good questions and really looking at what are those preconceived thoughts that the buyer has that I might need to address? So let's talk about price. And people will tell me is that they believe that the internet has affected their pricing. And the fact is they think that because there's an abundance of vendors offering similar products, that's forced undue price pressure on their offerings. Now, I'm going to show you some data, and looking at this first part of the data might actually affirm that position for you. So the first one is 71% of buyers interviewed said that they would change for an equivalent product at a lower price. Well, that's not great. Now, when you throw this on top, which is 82% of buyers frequently award contracts to existing suppliers. So it looks like if you just offer a lower price, that's not a great strategy because you'll lose 82% of the time because they're likely to go back to their current supplier and ask them to price match. So to me, this information is not great, but let me give you some better news, which is only 7% of buyers say they always offer contracts to existing vendors. 7% of buyers say they always offer contracts to existing vendors. So the meaning of this is that 93% of the market is open to considering new partners. That's good news. Now let me show you another piece of information that's even better, which is 83% of buyers interviewed said they would buy from a supplier who offers a better solution even if it's more expensive. So what this survey means is that only 17% are using price as the number one criteria to make a purchasing decision. So 83% of the buyers will choose a better solution even if it's more expensive. Now, you have to understand, though, that if the two options look exactly the same, the buyer will often default to price as a tiebreaker. So if everything looks exactly the same, if they can't see a difference, price will factor in. But if you can show the client a difference and why your solution is better, they will buy it. It's a small percentage. Now, when I tell people that it's probably 17 to 20% of the marketplace are price shoppers, this is always an argument. People always think I'm wrong. The reality is I've seen study after study which comes in around that same mark, which is between 20 and 15% of the marketplace are solely focused on price. But if price is an issue, what you haven't done is done a good job of showing why your solution is better and should be more expensive. So this brings up the need to be able to differentiate your product offerings from those of your competitor. For those of you who are unable to show prospects why and how you're different, then you're going to be forced into that commodity marketplace, meaning that the price you charge for your goods will be constantly under pressure. Remember, if the solutions all look the same, that price will become an issue. So here's some important questions you should be asking yourself at this point. Is it readily apparent to visitors to my website how my products and services are different, distinct, or hold a unique position in the marketplace? in a sales situation, are we as a company equipped to explain how and why we're different than our competitors? And to be honest, most people can't answer that. And when they get asked or when they get pushed and somebody asks them, well, how are you different? What's the difference between you and your competitors? Most people can't answer that question. And it's often that awkward silence at the table while they scramble around and talk. I watched a web developer in a meeting get asked how his solution was different than a $1,000 website that they could find someone to do online. And it was, to be honest, it was a train wreck watching. So if you can't position why and how you're different, if you can't even do it, how do you expect the buyer to really be able to sort it out for themselves? So you have to be prepared. And that differentiation, is that point of differentiation meaningful and valuable to our target audience? If that differentiation doesn't mean anything to the target audience, then it won't allow you to sell it at a higher price. And it will actually mean that someone will maybe, in that research phase that goes on, exclude talking to you. So what I'd like to talk about is about each of those issues and what strategies you need to be considering to allow yourself and your organization to sell more in a changing sales environment. So the first one is to stop waiting and get proactive. If you're waiting until prospects are contacting you, you're missing out on a considerable portion of the opportunities that are available out there. In a lot of cases, you could have already been removed from consideration based on the prospect's research of your website. If it's critical that you look at how you engage prospects in that research phase of their search, this means you must understand how and why your ideal prospects are searching. What problems that are they actively searching for? And what keywords or language are they using? What questions are being asked? It's key to remember that your prospects are not often looking for products or services, but instead searching for answers to their problems, because they often don't know what they don't know. I don't know necessarily the answer to the problem I have, and so I'm trying to diagnose it myself, that self-diagnosis. So I'm looking for information, I'm looking for things that maybe other people have done, other issues. I might search with questions. And it is critical to get in there early and get in front of those prospects early. So you want to really take a hard look at how you're connecting with people. Are there ways for people to connect with you from your website? Do you have lead generation? Do you have lead capture? Do you have a plan for what you do after you capture the lead? Do you have a thought of what comes next? The next thing is you've got to talk about difference. Your website has to do more than tell what you offer. It must tell prospects how you're different and distinct than your competitors. Remember, if all options look the same, the natural tiebreaker will be price. And I'll give you a great exercise. Now, we run this with clients. And what I do is I give them 4 pages from their website and remove the branding and images, and then do the same for 3 competitors. Then what I do is I ask them to pick out which one is their website. This is one of my favorite things to do. I've been keeping track of how often they get it right. And to be honest, about 1 in 8 can identify their own website content. 1 in 8 can identify their own website content. The other question I ask is I often ask them which is the worst website content of the 4 that they see in front of them. 1 in 4 pick their content as being the worst. So 1 in 8 can pick out their own content. 1 in 4 think theirs is the worst. And the problem is that it often all looks the same. And that's why we run the exercise, is because often the text, the look, it all looks the same. Now, you might be able to spot differences, but the fact is that your prospects don't have the same background as you do. They don't know as much about the industry as you do. And so you have to talk about that difference on your website. Next is offer prospects meaningful and valuable insight in helping them better understand their problems. Give them resources and tools to guide them and give them context to the diagnosis stage. There used to be a great tool out there from a company called HubSpot. And HubSpot used to have a website checker. And the website checker would go, you'd put in your website URL, and the website checker would walk through, and it would tell you all the issues that you had with your website. Was there lead capture? Was there social media? Was there a blog? It went through all the issues. And then actually what it did was it sent you back a report that said, here's all the issues that you have. And here's a score. Well, what was funny was a few people that I introduced to this tool became obsessed with getting a higher score. So it used to give you a score out of 100. And people would become obsessed about improving their website to get a higher score. And what it helped people to do was diagnose the problems that they had. And who was a company that they would often look to and spend some time on their website was the company that offered that, which was HubSpot. They would often look at HubSpot's website and understand what HubSpot does. And HubSpot is for companies that want to do lead capture and to push content. And it's a good tool, mostly for larger companies. But it's funny how that diagnosis became a tool that people talked about and used and actually compared scores. And so always remember that if you give them resources, and the resources don't have to necessarily be something like what HubSpot, it could be as simple as a checklist to walk through. It could be a list of helpful questions that they should be asking themselves. But give them some resources and tools to help guide them along. What you also need to be able to do is understand your prospects' buying triggers. Now, a buying trigger is an event that causes a buyer to have a clear need, which usually converts into a sense of purpose and an urgency in their buying process. So if your server fails, you're immediately in the market. That's a buying trigger to buy a new server or a new computer. So let me give you a couple more examples. As an example, maybe the purchase of a new home might result in the need or the hiring of a mortgage broker. So I'm buying this new home. I got to get a mortgage. maybe what I'm going to do instead of going back to the bank is I'm going to actually look at a mortgage broker. Or if I book a wedding venue, that might result in the hiring of a florist or a cake decorator. The purchase of a heavy-duty commercial work truck might be the trigger for buying a vehicle wrap or some vehicle signage. So once you understand your prospect's triggers, what you can do is look downstream for partners who maybe you can create an alliance with to identify prospects. So if I understand who they might be seeing before or who they might be talking before, I can start to make alliances with those people. So if I'm a mortgage broker, I want to have alliances with real estate agents. Anytime they have a house, anytime they're trying to help someone buy a house, I'd love to get that lead, because if I can get that lead, I can often get a sale. And that's where coming back to giving some resources and tools. If the real estate agent knows you offer tools that might help the buyer and might actually speed up the house purchase, they're going to be happy to send people your way. Next is that you need to look and change your views on the way you and your sales team sell. No one can do the traditional tell and sell method anymore. In fact, the first order of business must be to determine those buyer perceptions that we talked about early. And the buyer's perceptions, correct, incorrect, or even misguided, strongly influence whether buyers buy from you or from your competitors. So you need to think and deal with the changing face of sales. You need to look at why people are coming to you and when they're coming to you. So the fact is that the sales process is shrinking. You've got to look at different ways that you can help generate leads. Who are you following up on? Where are you attracting them? Do you need some strategic alliances? Do you be needing some other tools like using social media or using telephone prospecting still works? There's lots of tools out there for you to use, but we often have to change our approach to those tools. So cold calling is not dead, as much as people say. Is if anything, cold calling is making a return, and we're seeing more and more organizations actually switch to inside sales models, because there still has to be a person to talk to. And so that's where things like lead scoring come in, or the ability to nurture leads before you have somebody call them. But it's interesting is that you'll read lots of things, and I've gotten 2 phone calls last week one was from Google, asking about Google AdWords and trying to get me to use Google AdWords more. The second was LinkedIn was calling me to upgrade the membership that I have with them. So what's interesting is these high-tech companies that are involved in social media and web search and all that are still actually using the telephone to close people, to move people into a sales opportunity. Now, I'll give you a prime example. I work with a company in California, and one of the things that they used to run was they used to run webinars like this. And what we brought in for them was lead scoring, which meant if a prospect came to their webinar, asked some questions, downloaded resources, and then visited the pricing page, the system automatically sent a message to their salespeople to follow up. The other thing that we installed there was the ability for their salespeople to go and invite people personally to webinars. By doing that, actually the number of people in their webinars went up incredibly by actually making that telephone. If they just sent out an email message, some people responded but there were still others that were sitting on the fence. And so what they've had to do is change their selling and change their selling style to adjust the way people are looking. And that's something that you're going to have to also look at. Now, we talked about this being a 45-minute webinar, and so we are still bang on time. So I'm going to open it up for any questions that you might have. Be happy to answer any of them. And so Selena's asked, is there any other problems you can see with websites? Well, there's typically 4 issues with websites that we see nowadays. And the first one is that there's no lead capture often on websites. So they're not capturing any of their leads. The other thing is there might be lead capture, but then they don't look at something like lead nurturing, because when somebody visits your website, they might not buy for a period of time. They might be just in that early research phase or just stumbled across you. So you want to have the ability to capture leads, but you also want to have that next thing, which is having lead nurturing. So they'd be able to, once you get a lead, to be able just to drip market to them, to offer them resources, to build yourself up in that analysis stage by the prospect as the person that they should contact when they're serious about buying. And remember that stat, 65%, you could 65% of the people buy from the person who is the first person to add value in their search. The other thing is they have no plan for what happens next and what they want people on their website to do. So the website is often a great sales tool. I'm a huge believer in your website is a great tool, but it's not a brochure. It's got to do a lot more than just tell things about what you do. And the last one on websites that we really see is they're not written for a target audience. So they're written from the owner's point of view, not for the target audience. And that's an important thing, is they must be written for the target audience. They must talk about the things that the target audience is going to be interested in. I got another question here from Jacob, and it says, it's a great question, which is, if my sales cycle is shrinking, wouldn't I see sales being faster, which hasn't been my experience? Well, that's a great question, Jacob. The answer to that is actually yes and no. And so if you're speaking to the right people at the right time, it is going to happen much faster because they're further along. They've done some research. But you can still end up with bad opportunities or into an opportunity too soon or talking with the wrong people. Now remember, there's a glut of information out there, so it's not unusual for the wrong person to be coming to you, maybe reaching out to you. And so you've got to get better at qualifying, and that's part of this, is doing a better job at qualifying. If you qualify correctly, you're not going to get those bad opportunities. And this is where some things like sales automation helps with things like lead scoring, lead nurturing, that will show you who's come onto your website and ultimately mark those who are more likely to buy, so that your salespeople are chasing people who are likely to buy and not people who aren't there yet, or a one-time visitor to your website. So you want to make sure that you've got some of those things in there. And to your second question, Jacob, yeah, we could help you with that. What we are seeing is a shift to this whole area of lead generation and automation. And to be honest, it's not as expensive as people think. And Jacob keeps responding, which is he now has said, but it's way too expensive for me. Typically, what we see is you're in that $200 to $300 a month range for a CRM, lead generation, and marketing automation. A little bit of upfront cost to that, but the reality is that probably some of you are paying more in Yellow Pages ads. where you could actually look at something like sales automation, which would automatically score leads for you, which would automate the process. You still have to build some of that stuff, but it would automate a lot of that. But it really is, with the way things are changing, we want to be able to nurture clients and deal with visitors. I'll give you a prime example. Is I had someone buy from me just recently, and they attended a webinar I'd done 2 years ago. And to be honest, they hadn't attended anything else, but I kept in touch, and they got notices and a newsletter and some other things. 2 years later, they contacted me and said, I really want to buy, and now I'm ready to buy. And I said, well, tell me a little bit about what you've been doing. Well, I wasn't ready 2 years ago to buy. It was a little above where I'm at. So now I want to buy. So, that's an important thing, was that you don't want to lose track with that person. You want to make sure that you get in early. So I've got a minute over time. Just one last thing on here is, if you're interested, we're running a Sales 0.20 web series called Changing the Way You Sell for Today's Buyer. And this is a 4-session webinar series where we actually talk about skills and look at selling skills and tools that you need moving forward. If you're interested, afterwards we'll send you a link where you could register if you're interested. And because you attended the webinar, instead of it being $199 for the 4 sessions, it's $149, and so it's a little cheaper, and you can sign up online. And if you've got any more questions that we haven't answered or that come to you later, feel free to contact me. Here's my contact information. It's Colin at LoneStarSalesPerformance.com. Feel free to connect, and we'll be happy to connect with you. And I just want to thank you for your time. And again, if there's any more questions, feel free to email me or call me, and I'll be happy to talk. So again, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it, and look forward to talking to you soon. Thanks.